What's up, RP fam? Thank you guys for stopping in for another video. My quarterback rankings are done and out of the way. Make sure you check those out if you have not done so already. I went through the top 30 options, broke them into tiers, helping those in super flex leagues. But today, I am going over the top 50 options at the running back position. I'm not sure, I might end up breaking this into two separate videos depending how long it goes. My quarterback video was about a half an hour long and I went over 30 people, so I don't want this video to get too ridiculous. I will try to slim it down as much as I can, but I do want to give you guys as much information as possible, help you guys make the best decisions. That way we can dominate in fantasy football this year. Quick caveat, I do all of my rankings in half-point PPR. I feel like this is the best happy medium between full PPR and standard leagues. It'll give you guys an idea between the middle of those two. I do have 11 tiers for my 50 running backs. But before we hop into that, make sure you like the video first and foremost if you enjoy the content. Subscribing as well would be greatly appreciated. Relentless Press is pushing for our first 1,000 subscribers. And if you haven't hit that button yet, you can be a part of the journey with us. To all my current subscribers out there, love you guys. You are amazing. Could not and would not do this without you. And without any further ado, let's hop into my rankings. I start in the first tier. Number one, it is Christian McCaffrey. Run CMC is the elite lead dog this year, although I do think it is close with my number two guy. McCaffrey did lead all backs in points scored from weeks 8 to 17. That was after that trade to San Francisco. He averaged over 20 and a half-point fantasy PPR points per game. He also averaged nearly 20 touches per game and nearly 5 catches per game. So those receptions, especially in PPR and half, are going to help boost his stats and numbers even more. Now, there are a lot of question marks in San Francisco, which is why I don't automatically think CMC is the number one running back, even though I do have him ranked as such. I just think that there's a little more risk because of that quarterback situation. However, the surrounding weapons are awesome. We saw how efficient and dominant CMC was. Basically, no matter who was the quarterback last year, that's why I think that we can draft him here with confidence. Into number two, and the guy I think has a legit shot at unseating McCaffrey, it is Austin Ekeler here. He is the RB2 and RB1 overall in half PPR, has the most touchdowns in the NFL over the last 2 seasons. He has been a dominant force for the Chargers, and I don't see any reason for him to go back on that this year. He's in a contract year, definitely disputes about what he is getting paid. He's made it very clear he is not happy with the situation. He is going to be playing for a big pile of money in 2023, and we can never take that for granted. I think Ekeler is due for a big time season. No one was also brought into the backfield here to compete for Ekeler. Justin Jackson is the presumed number two, but he is not going to threaten the workload much for Ekeler. The offensive line in LA is also due to improve drastically. They lost Rashawn Slater, of top probably 5 left tackle last year for a lot of the season. He should be back and healthy, which will make this offensive line that much better, more dangerous, and give more space for Ekeler to work. However, we know the real place that he does damage is in the passing game. 177 receptions for Ekeler in the last 2 years. That big time pass catching upside is not going anywhere. I will say that it is likely we see those numbers decline from last year's 100+ receptions because of the addition of Quentin Johnson, but I think Ekeler can make up for that with a little more rushing. They've talked about trying to be a little bit more run heavy and take some pressure off of the passing game, and Ekeler has over 900 yards on the ground in back-to-back seasons. He is no slouch there. Of course, Chargers offense is awesome. Ekeler averaging 19 tutties in the last 2 years. Somewhere along those lines is probably where he's going to end in 2023 as well. That is the end of my first tier. I think those two guys are the clear 1 and 2. There's a little bit of a dip here. And my third running back and the start of tier 2 is Bijan Robinson. I am all about this rookie. I think he has superstar potential. And we start by looking at that strength of schedule, which is certainly going to help. The Atlanta offensive line was pretty dominant as a unit last year. And then to have nearly a top 10 strength of schedule on top of it just just means plenty of upside for Robinson. He was the second ranked back in PFF last year. He had a dominator rating of 37%, which was just a couple percentage points behind someone like Breece Hall. And we saw when healthy what Breece Hall brought to the table. He was a top 6, top 8 running back when he was healthy. So to be in that type of a conversation means good things for Robinson. We also look at what else he brought to the table at Texas. Breaking tackles was extremely easy for him. Over 100 missed tackles forced at Texas, a 40% broken tackle rate, one of the best in college football, which means when he is out in space, he is going to be extremely dangerous. Bijan rushed for over 1,500 yards and 18 touchdowns in 2022. He also ranked third among backs in yards per catch at over 16 per. So when he gets those opportunities, he was making the most of them. He also did not have even a single drop last year for Texas. Robinson is listed at 5'11", 215 pounds, so he has the size to be a true 3-down back in the NFL. And with all that was invested in him, I think that is exactly what Atlanta is hoping to get from him in 2023. Next up in tier number 2, and at number 4, with a little bit of hesitancy, I have Saquon Barkley. Barkley was the RB5 both overall and in points per game last season. He had the second most touches in the NFL, and he was also second in backfield opportunity share at 80%. So he was being fed the rock at an elite rate. I do not think that is going to change this season. There is no reason for us to believe it will. Barkley is also due for some positive touchdown regression. He scored just 10 times on 23 carries inside of the 10 last year. If he gets those amount of looks, he probably adds 3 or 4 to his total from last year, and that would be a big boost to his fantasy prospects. Another reason to love Barkley this year is that there is not really a true number 1 receiver in New York. They did add Darren Waller, which will be great for the passing game and should help open things up for Barkley. But I also think that he is going to be the target a lot of times in dump-offs from Daniel Jones because there is not that alpha in this offense to look to. Barkley could be that guy in the passing game as well as the running game. Next up, and rounding out my top 5, I have Derrick Henry. The first thing I love about him is that strength of schedule. A top 5 schedule for a back who has dominated year in and year out for a while is always a sight we love to see. Henry last year was second in carries, he was third in rushing yards, and he was the RB4 overall in points per game last season, so he dominated in many key metrics. He did average over 23 touches per game, so the same concerns that I had last year as far as that workload and what it looked like going into the next year are here again. But Henry showed that he is a different type of dude, and he has so far, besides that year a couple years ago and that late injury, been able to hold up to the punishment. The addition of DeAndre Hopkins on the outside, I think, is big for this Titans offense and has flown a little bit under the radar. That should help open up some rushing lanes for Henry, who has not had that advantage over the past couple seasons, no true number 1. And that also allows Treylon Burks to slide into that number 2 role. I think he's going to be a lot more comfortable there, and it will help him develop, which means a better offense for Tennessee and hopefully more points coming for Henry. The next man up on my list is a guy I really tried to find a way to fit into my top 5, but I just could not. He is the last running back in tier 2 for me, and he is the safest pick at running back that you can possibly make. He is Nick Chubb. That strength of schedule is not great, but Chubb has shown throughout his career that it does not matter for him. He is going to be dominant force on the ground regardless. Chubb has been an RB1, a top 12 performer in half PPR in 4 straight years. He has finishes of RB7, 11, 10, and then a career high RB6 finish last year. He's scoring over 10 touchdowns a season as well, so he checks every single box that you could ever want. And not only that, but Chubb has been uber efficient. For his career, every single season he's played, he's averaged at least 5 yards per carry or more. So he has been the force that has driven this Cleveland Browns offense. Chubb has also famously been someone who does not help us out in the passing game. However, there is a little bit more meat on the bone than maybe people would lead you to believe. He does have 20 receptions or more in 4 out of the past 5 seasons. And the bigger news here is that Kareem Hunt is now gone, and he was basically the pass catching back for the Browns. So even if we give him a couple more receptions over the course of each game, over the course of a season, Chubb should be able to boost his stats more than he ever has in his career with some passing game usage. We also know that the Browns have an awesome offensive line. They are going to create space and opportunities for Chubb to dominate like he has. And this is year 2 of Deshaun Watson as well. Watson should be able to shake off all that rust that was evident last season. I am a big believer in a top 10 finish from him, and that will mean that Chubb is playing in an offense that is even better than last year with all of the crud that he had to deal with. This offense could be borderline elite. It could threaten top 10 numbers, and if that happens, Chubb is going to crush his current ADP. I have 4 running backs next in my 3rd tier, and it starts with Tony Pollard. He had an absolutely monster season for Dallas last year. I was banging the drum for him for the last 2 years, really, and finally the hashtag free Tony Pollard movement worked out, and he was unleashed. He was the RB7 overall in 2022. He ranked outside of the top 25 in touches per game. So to be able to put up those kind of numbers without really getting much volume gives us hope that he can continue that torrid pace he set last year and really help carry our teams this season. Pollard was the 3rd highest graded running back on PFF, so it was not just in the stat sheets that he was being successful. It was that efficiency, and it was that ability to produce no matter the circumstances around him. He scored the most fantasy points in the league from week 7 to 16 as that featured back when Zeke Elliott was dealing with knee issues. Speaking of Elliott, he is now gone, and really only Ronald Jones was added in free agency as depth. They did draft Deuce Vaughn late on a day 3 pick, so honestly I would say that there is little to no competition for Pollard, which means even if he doesn't see a giant workload, because I think they want to limit the touches he gets, he's shown he's been uber efficient. He's shown that even without the total touches being in the top 25, he can put up top 10 numbers, and I am all in on another big season from him for the Cowboys. That brings me to the first running back that I am in love with far more than others. I have him way above consensus at RB8. It is Joe Mixon, and really we've seen this from him before. Last year, Joe was the RB8 in points per game last year. He did miss a couple games with injuries, but when he was in, he was productive. He averaged nearly 17 fantasy points per game in the second half of the year. That was after that offensive line for Cincinnati started to gel and really started to play better together. Over the course of the entire year, if he had remained at that 17 fantasy point per game pace like he did in the second half, he would have been good enough for RB5 overall on the year, and he was the RB3 overall just 2 years ago in 2021. So I think people may be overlooking what the production could be from Mixon. We also want to take into consideration that this Cincinnati offense is dominant. They scored over 26 points a game last year. They were top 5 in the NFL. That means that Mixon is going to have a ton of scoring opportunities, and he's going to be able to do it behind an offensive line that is now better, healthier, and has had a year to develop together. Another huge thing that boosts Mixon's profile this year is the loss of Samaje Perine. Mixon also set career high with 60 receptions last year, and Perine was the main threat to those receptions out of the backfield, so with him gone, we could see Mixon easily see 75, 80 targets this year. The opportunity has been and will continue to be there for Mixon. He was second in the NFL last year. He had 28 touches inside the 10-yard line, so they trusted him in close. If he pays off a couple more of those this year and we see some positive touchdown regression, Mixon could easily hit top 5 numbers, and he is being drafted right now as a very late RB1, somewhere in the range of RB12, RB14. I think he is a steal at that current cost, and I would willingly invest on him half of a round earlier than that. Next up at number 9, I have 2 more players in this tier, and at 9 it's Ramondre Stevenson of New England. He's been an elite back over the last 2 years, probably the quietest back-to-back elite seasons for a running back in recent memory. He posted a top 3 running back finish in PFF in 2021, and last year he was still top 11. So he has put up those efficiency numbers in back-to-back seasons on an offense that has been below average, to be kind. We also know that Damian Harris is gone now in Buffalo, so the competition for touches in New England's backfield is basically slim to none. Stevenson was an RB1 in 44% of his games last year. Most of that was splitting time. So as he takes the true workhorse RB1 role in New England, really the sky is the limit for him. Just like Mixon, he's also due for some positive touchdown regression. He scored just 3 touchdowns on his 19 carries inside of the 10. If he converts a couple more of those, it will only shoot him up even higher. After going from 18 targets to 88 last year, we could see 100 plus targets from Ramondre Stevenson without a doubt in this offense, and there aren't really any pass catchers here that he has to worry about. Juju Smith-Schuster ain't it, so we could easily see Ramondre once again hit career highs in that category. If Stevenson does end up getting those type of looks, it sets up an easy 350 plus touch season for him. The last player in my top 10, someone falling down my board a little bit because of the outside situations that he is currently dealing with, I have Jonathan Taylor. Now, Taylor averaged 12.5 fantasy points per game last year when he was healthy. It was good enough for RB18, far cry from what we saw just a couple years ago when he dominated the league. He also finished outside of the top 30 at the position, playing in just 11 games last year. And we know he is supposedly still working back from injury. So that gives me pause to invest a top pick on him until we get some more updated information, until his contract situation is figured out and all of that. Now, it's not all doom and gloom for Taylor. He was top 8 as far as usage in 2022. The Colts did not shy away from giving him the rock when he was healthy. He was 8th in expected points per game, and he was also 4th in touches per game, seeing 20 per. You want to see that volume in a back you are going to pay a hefty price tag for. The negative that we saw, and really what pushed him down as far as a finisher in fantasy last year, was the 4 touchdowns that Jonathan Taylor had last year. He had 20 plus just a couple of years ago, and that number completely fell off a cliff last season. Now, if the situation he's in turns around, then we can see a path where Jonathan Taylor once again bounces back to a top 5 back this year. But right now, he is just inside of my top 10 because of the many question marks. I think the Anthony Richardson draft pick will help him out. It is always nice to have a mobile quarterback in the backfield. It makes it harder for defenses. So I think that plays to his advantage. But like I said, we have to figure out his contract situation before I feel super confident pulling the trigger on him. The range of outcomes for him currently is just too wide for me. We're going to move to my 4th tier now. I have 5 running backs in this tier, number 4. And at 11 overall, I have Jahmyr Gibbs. He has so much going for him this year. I'm honestly quite surprised that he is not higher in the general consensus. I think right now Gibbs is going somewhere around running back 18. I have him as a top 12 option, and I am going to tell you why. First and foremost, you see it on the screen there. It is that number 1 strength of schedule. No one is going to have an easier time in the backfield than Gibbs, and he is going to be taking advantage of that behind a top 5 offensive line. The Lions have spent a lot of money and spent a lot of high quality draft picks on that position, and their offensive line should really make things easy for him in 2023. I know that the Lions did make a kind of big money signing in free agency at the position in David Montgomery, but trust me, as a Vikings fan watching this guy play over the last couple seasons, I am not concerned about David Montgomery. This guy is average at best. He has not been a baller in the efficiency metrics. In fact, Khalil Herbert outperformed him in basically everything that last year for the Bears. So Montgomery, he may eat into the workload a little bit, more so to keep Gibbs fresh, but I am not worried about him siphoning too many looks in this offense. Jameer ranked second in PFF receiving grade during his first 2 college seasons, and he was also top 3 in receiving yardage numbers for running backs in his final 2 years. So Gibbs has shown elite ability in the passing game. That is something we love from running backs, especially rookie running backs with no tread on the tires. So I'm not worried about the addition of Montgomery. Plus, the Lions got rid of both Jamal Williams and DeAndre Swift. Those 2 subtractions open up 26 touches per game in this backfield for Detroit. That is a ton of touches, and that means that even if Gibbs doesn't see all of them, which obviously he is not going to, even if he sees half or a majority, he is destined for at least 250 touches, and there is a world where he sees 300 plus looks in this Lions offense, one that was top 5 scoring in 2022. He does it behind a top offensive line with an easy schedule, and I think that means he easily has mid-tier RB1 upside, and you are not paying anything close to it for him right now. The last RB1 that I have in my rankings at 12 is Breece Hall. He was monster last year before he went down with injury. RB 6.5 PPR points per game in the 7 games he played at well over 15 per. He also averaged nearly 6 yards to carry as a rookie at 5.8, and he was 4th in yards after contact per attempt. So when he was getting hit, he was bouncing off of it and creating even more for his offense. I think right now it looks like he has a realistic shot at suiting up in week 1 because of that injury that was earlier on in the season. But for me, he would drop at least a tier if he stayed on the PUP list for your draft day. So make sure you check in on where he's at prior to pulling the trigger on him. Right now, I think he's a top 12 option if all goes well and he heals up. Aaron Rodgers' addition is also big for Breece Hall. It should help open up the running game. I'm not huge on Rodgers this year, but I am not going to doubt the fact that the quarterback situation last year in New York was an absolute travesty, and regardless, it will be better with Rodgers at the helm, which means easier and lighter boxes for Hall to run through. The strength of schedule for him is not bad either, just another bonus. On to 13, and I have Najee Harris here for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Last year's RB 14.5 fantasy points per game. He bounced back after starting out really slow, and it's always been about the volume for Harris. I don't think that changes this season. Last year he was 6th in opportunity share at 70%, and he was also 8th in total touches last year. That volume should come back again. There was a lot of concern about Jaylen Warren. Didn't really end up being the case. He didn't lose much to him at all. I don't know why that would change because we saw how he turned it around and how he bounced back in the second half. He was RB7 in points per game over the last 9 weeks of the season. We know that Pittsburgh had a really brutal offensive line last year, and while it shouldn't be a whole lot better, this year it is improved, and we can hope for a year 2 step up from Kenny Pickett, who did flash as the season went on. He started out really bad, and he got better and better as the year went on. Now, we don't know if that happens, but if it does, that gives us an even more upside that Najee Harris can pull from. The Steelers are going to want to be a run-heavy team. I believe the volume will be there, and Harris will be a hit for us because of it. Dropping down my rankings way down at 14 once again because of the contract situation and all the off-field stuff. This has nothing to do with what Jacob performed on the field last year, but we know that he may not play this year. Right now, Zamir White is the RB1, so until we get more information, I am taking a cautious approach to him. Jacobs was the RB3 overall last year. He had over 2,000 yards, and he also had a dozen touchdowns. What gives me pause outside of his contract situation, of course, are the touches that he put on his body last year. Nearly 400 touches in 2022. Tons of concern about how he responds to that because only 2 running backs since 2013 have finished as an RB1 or a top 12 performer the year after they led the NFL in touches. So Jacobs is fighting history being back in a top 12 spot. Right now, I think his ADP is somewhere around RB10, RB12. I drop him here because of those concerns. That holdout could be very serious, and I just don't want that type of risk in my lineups. He is going to be the centerpiece of Vegas's offense if he does play, especially with that quarterback downgrade to Jimmy Garoppolo. So that gives me a reason for hoping, even if I'm not fully bought into Jacobs yet. Up next, and the last running back I have in my fourth tier, is Travis Etienne for Jacksonville. He was the RB16 on the year, but even better, he was a top 10 scorer in the second half of 2022. And that's really when we saw him take over the full load after James Robinson was traded away. Etienne was 5th in the NFL in carries inside of the 10-yard line last year. He had 23 opportunities, but he only capitalized on 4 of those. And that is where a little bit of my hesitancy for Etienne is, and why I have him up a little bit below consensus. The Jags did spend a pick on massive back Tank Bigsby. I assume he is going to take at least part, if not most, of the goal line role from this offense, because we did not see the success from Etienne in it last season. Calvin Ridley is also here now. He probably threatened some work in the passing game. That wasn't really what we expected it to be anyway in 2022. So I think that there are plenty of reasons why we need to pump the brakes a little bit on Etienne and have him a little bit more to that middle RB2 range as opposed to a low-end RB1. There's plenty of good news still for Etienne. He had 220 carries last year, and he averaged over 5 yards per tote, so you love that efficiency. He also plays in an ascending offense, and even though Bigsby may take some of his goal line role, Etienne is still the clear #1 for Jacksonville. Into tier 5 we go, and a guy that's fallen down my rankings just a little bit is Aaron Jones. He's here next, 16. He was the RB9 overall last year, and he also finished second in PFF receiving grade. So he had the metrics that show that he still has that elite ability. He also rocks into the 5th easiest strength of schedule this year, which only helps me think that he is going to have a decent year for Green Bay. The offense is probably also going to be more run heavy this year than it was last year with the move to Aaron Rodgers, and it was pretty run heavy last year actually. So a lot of opportunities most likely incoming for Aaron Jones, and he'll be able to do that behind an excellent offensive line in Green Bay. They were a little banged up last year, should be more healthy and improved this year. One of the concerns about Jones and something holding him back has been that A.J. Dillon goal line role threat. We didn't see it much last year in the beginning of the year. In the second half of the year, it reared its ugly head, and Dillon outtouched Aaron Jones inside the 10-yard line 14-5. Now that is not something that we like to see, and it is why I have Jones in the 5th tier as opposed to being a top 12 back like some people have him. I still think there's plenty of potential here because of the volume, but I have hesitancies because of not only A.J. Dillon, but also the move to Jordan Love. Next up at number 17 is my guy Alexander Mattison from the Minnesota Vikings. First thing that we know about him is that he has a limited sample size, but he has dominated as the lead back in Minnesota. In the 5 games where he has seen 20 touches or more, he's averaging 23 carries per game for 104 rushing yards, 4.5 yards per carry average as well, which is awesome, 41 reception yards per game, and 4 total touchdowns in those 5 games. Now, if we extrapolate that out to an entire season, that's nearly 2,500 yards and roughly 12 or 13 touchdowns. That would be an absolutely massive year for him, and it would crush the ADP that he's currently at. Now, I'm not sure that those numbers are fully obtainable. However, even if he sniffs somewhere close to that, he is going to crush his ADP and be a league winner for many teams. And the reasons to love Mattison this year are plenty. First and foremost, Minnesota's running back depth chart right now is an absolute joke. Rookie Ty Chandler, they have Dwayne McBride, and they have Nenny Nwangu, who is basically a kick returner and is banged up in camp anyway right now. So there is nobody to legitimately threaten touches for Mattison in this backfield. Minnesota just paid the man as well. Mattison was 15th out of 61 qualified backs according to PFF. He had a rushing grade of over 84, so he has shown that he's been in the upper echelon just last year when given opportunities. He also gets to run behind a young and improving offensive line, which should be a top 12 unit with one of the best pair of tackles in the entire NFL. And that offensive line could take a step forward because they're all back from last year. They're all healthy. Finally, this is one of the best offenses in the NFL around him. So Madison is going to be able to run against light boxes and see tons of scoring opportunities. The Vikings were a top 10 scoring unit last season. Final thing for me on Madison, a top 3, strength of schedule. You have to love it. On to 18. This is the third back in tier 5 for me with 3 more to go. I have Kenneth Walker up next at 18. He averaged 16.4 fantasy points per game. Once he took over the starting role, that number would have been good for RB8 if you extrapolate that over the course of an entire season. So clearly some big time upside for him. Rashad Penny is gone in this offense. See, I love that. Till you figure out that the Seahawks decided to spend another second-round pick on a running back after doing so to Walker last year. They drafted Zach Charbonnet. He posted the 5th highest PFF receiving grade last year. He also tied for first in receptions per game among his draft class. So the Hawks went out and got a pass-catching back, and that is why I have Walker a little bit farther down in my rankings. I do not see that receiving game role growing for him this year. It is most likely going to shrink, possibly significantly. That gives me pause to invest too much in him. Walker is right now also dealing with a groin injury, so something to keep an eye on. He did miss time because of that last year. However, Charbonnet is dealing with a shoulder injury, which is currently indefinite. So that is why I have Walker remaining in my top 20, at least for now. Depending on when you draft, make sure you check in on both of these guys for the most current update. Into number 19, a guy I was all about last year, and I'm going back to the well a little bit. It is J.K. Dobbins. The biggest thing that we need to understand when drafting Dobbins is that there is going to be risk. He's played in just 23 games over the last 3 years. Obviously, something you do not love to see. Now, when he has been on the field, he has been special. He finished last year on a tear. Over the final 5 games of the year, Dobbins averaged over 6.5 yards per carry, 92 rushing yards a game, and he was doing that with just 14 totes in that backfield. This is also the final year of his contract. There's plenty of incentive for Dobbin to have a big year, earn himself a massive payday. He is currently fighting the Ravens on that, trying to get his money, and I don't really blame him. The Ravens are going to run the ball this year. They do so every year. Baltimore is one of the most run-heavy teams in the NFL over the last 4 seasons, and Dobbins is also going to have the benefit of running behind a top 10 offensive line for Baltimore. Passing game does not really have any clear stars, at least right now, outside of Mark Andrews, which leads me to believe Baltimore will continue to do what they do and pound the rock. Rounding out my top 20, another guy I was all about last year, who ended up biting me until the end of the year when he balled out, and is Cam Akers. He was the RB4 over the last 6 weeks of the season. He averaged 85 rushing yards per game. So even though he gave us fits to start the year, he did turn it on and become what I thought he would be the beginning of the year. There is nobody on this roster that is going to steal touches from Akers this season. Darrell Henderson is gone. Right now they have Zach Evans, Ronnie Rivers, and Kyren Williams filling out this depth chart. So I can see a world where Akers gets 20 plus touches each and every game as long as he can stay healthy. Just like Dobbins, this is a contract year for him, and I think he has even more to prove than Dobbins after how everything fell apart for him last year, almost getting traded away and all of that nonsense. So Akers needs to turn it around. He is going to be depending on a big year this year to help him earn some money in free agency. We know that Matthew Stafford also struggled last year and was injured. Cooper Kupp left the high ankle sprain and didn't return after the middle of the year. So overall, this Rams offense was a dumpster fire last year, and we saw Cam Akers still be able to perform in it. Last running back I have in tier number 5. Up next at number 21 is Miles Sanders. He steps into an awesome situation after signing a deal in free agency. We know that the Panthers are going to want to lean on the running game, especially early on, to take the pressure off of new rookie quarterback Bryce Young, and I think that that means big time usage for Sanders. He was the RB11 last year. He averaged nearly 5 yards per carry, over 250 totes in 2022, so he held up to the workload for Philadelphia. He also was top 5 in carries inside the 10-yard line, so they used him as a battering ram in close, something I expect Carolina to do this season as well. Another thing that we love about Sanders is that the competition just isn't there for him. The only thing he's going to have to worry about is 2021 4th-round pick Chuba Hubbard eating into that workload, and I do not find that very likely at all. Carolina's offensive line last year was top 10 in adjusted line yards. They are still young, they are still improving, and they have spent some premium picks in that place over the last couple seasons, and I expect them to take another step forward this year. As a rookie, Sanders caught 50 balls in the backfield, and even though that went away over the last couple seasons as Philadelphia kind of changed what their offense looked like, he did show that ability. And now back in Carolina, running back coach Deuce Staley, the guy that was there with him in Philly when he caught 50 balls, is going to be his running back coach. So there is a clear path to him getting 50 or more receptions out of the backfield for the Panthers this season as well, which means there is a legit path for 300 plus touches for a guy that also has a top 10 strength of schedule. And at the 21st back ranked, you really don't have a cheaper option at buying in at a potential and probable true bell cow back. Before I hop into tier 6, great time to remind you guys to smash that like button for me and subscribe to the channel if you have not done so already. There is going to be a ton of content coming out over the next couple of weeks from Relentless Press. I do not want you to miss anything. Now let's hop into tier 6, and it starts with Dameon Pierce. Now from weeks 2 to weeks 10, Pierce was 5th in the NFL in rushing yards with 739. He also averaged nearly 20 carries and 92 rushing yards per game. He was an RB1 top 12 performer during that stretch, so we have seen elite production from him already. Pierce was also 4th in missed tackles forced in the NFL. He had the highest percentage per attempt in the league, which seems pretty obvious because he missed so much time towards the second half of last year. Devin Singletary will come in and threaten him for touches, and there is risk because this is a new coaching staff that does not have ties to Pierce, but I think because of the production we saw last year, there is not really much to worry about. I think CJ Stroud makes things easier on him, and there really is no true weapons in this offense outside of Pierce, so he should see a ton of looks and opportunities in 2023. Next up on my list, in at number 23, I have Javonte Williams for Denver. He was the RB12 last year in expected points per game prior to his injury. Williams had the #1 elusive rating among all backs that had 45 carries or more. You'll love to see that. And then he was also injured in week 4, so it is a good chance that he is back and ready for week 1. There is plenty of time for turnaround there. Now, the concern is with Samaje Perine coming in, he has proven to be a viable backup. He might eat into Williams' workload early as they ease him in, but we have seen Williams dominate on a per touch basis before. I think that Denver's offense is going to be better, and I think that there is plenty of upside for him as the 23rd running back on my rankings. Next up, in the last running back 2 that I have is Rachaad White. This guy averaged 11 fantasy points per game as the 1A in Tampa's backfield from weeks 10 to 17, so he did have some decent production there. He also racked up 50 receptions, and that was 11th among all running backs last season. That passing game work is going to keep him relevant because there are sure to be plenty of negative game scripts in Tampa Bay. Leonard Fournette is also gone, and only Chase Edmonds was brought in as a threat to touches, who is not really one if you have to ask me. So I do not believe that Edmonds is going to siphon much work away from White this year. Tampa Bay's offensive line is also due to be much better. They were absolutely shredded last year as far as injuries are concerned. So even with, half as much luck this year. There is going to be more room to roam for White for this team. They are going to need someone to handle balls in the backfield, and it is going to be White who does that. To round out my top 25, I have James Conner. He's the second to last guy in this tier, and there's actually a lot to like about Conner, just like with Rachaad White, as a potential bell cow back this late in your draft. Conner was the RB4 overall in his last 8 games. He averaged 17 fantasy points per game. You are buying the volume here and the floor for James Conner because he does not have a ton of upside, but he should see a bunch of work in this offense, especially as Kyler Murray misses time. There aren't really any other legit weapons outside of Marquise Brown. So Arizona gonna need to score a lot because I don't think their defense is going to be that good, which leads me to believe we could see a ton of looks from Conner as long as he stays healthy in this offense. I think he has top maybe 15 upside if everything hits for him this year. On to 26 and the last running back I have in tier number 6. I have DeAndre Swift here. He was absolutely incredible on a per touch basis. He ranked 4th in fantasy points per touch. He was also 3rd in yards per carry last year. Now he will have to battle with Rashad Penny, Kenneth Gainwell, as well as Boston Scott for touches in this backfield. There is a potential to be a 4-headed monster in this backfield, and that is why I am so down on Swift in 2023. The Eagles also finished dead last in running back target share last year, and that's really where Swift made his hay as far as production is concerned. So if we take that part of his game out, there is definitely red flags for me as far as what Swift can bring to the table for us. Swift will remain elite on a per touch basis. That is not in question. He also has a top offensive line to deal with in Philadelphia, maybe the best in the NFL. The only question is, what do you believe as far as touches are going to come for Swift? If you think that he is a hit for 200 plus touches in this offense, which he might be if he stays healthy, then he is going to crush this ADP. But if he ends up splitting time with any of the other backs that I mentioned, or he gets hurt, which he basically has in every single season of his entire career, then he might be a nightmare to own, just like he was last year when you didn't know to play him or not. So I like him, I see the upside, but I probably won't heavily invest in him in 2023. The next man up for me in at 27, I have James Cook. He headlines tier number 7. He earned a 40% snap share over the final 7 games of the season last year, and he did that while posting top 25 numbers in limited opportunity. He was number 1 in PFF's breakaway run rate last year at 44%, showcasing that explosiveness that the Bills drafted him for. He was also 5th last year in yards per carry at 5.3 per tote, and Damian Harris is going to be his competition after Devin Singletary left in free agency. We know that Harris is not a pass-catching back. He had just 2 games with 3 or more receptions in his last 2 seasons played. So Harris is not going to take those valuable receptions away from Cook, whose target rate per route run was on par with both Run CMC and Alvin Kamara in 2022. That would have been 5th among running backs with 30 or more targets. Cook is going to see those high value touches in one of the best offenses in the NFL, and if he can somehow take over that number 1 role and really get the lion's share of the carries and touches in this backfield, Cook has the potential to be a league winner for us in 2023. Down to number 28, I have Alvin Kamara here. Now that 3-game suspension he is facing is probably the best case scenario for him, and because of that you might be wondering why I have him ranked so low at 28. So let me give you a rundown. The receiving ability has dropped off for him over the last 2 seasons. 104 receptions total after going for 80 plus in 4 straight years to start his career. That takes a massive amount of upside away from him. His running ability has also cratered over the last 2 years as well. He has averaged less than 4 yards per carry. There's also competition brought in with third-round pick Kendre Miller. Jamal Williams, last year's #1 rusher as far as touchdowns is concerned in the backfield, was also brought in from Detroit. So there are just a ton of people fighting for looks in this backfield. You have a suspension to worry about. You have efficiency metrics that have cratered over the last couple of years. There is really no reason to buy Alvin Kamara any higher, and I have him ranked. To 29 we go. I have Isaiah Pacheco here next. Pacheco dominated towards the second half of last year when the Chiefs turned the rock over to him. He was 6th in the NFL in rushing yards from weeks 10 to 17, and he also improved his ability in the passing game late. He had 5 catches against the Bengals in the conference championship game, which leads us to believe that that passing game usage could grow for him this year, and that would be a big boost to his fantasy profile. In the Super Bowl, with everything on the line, the Chiefs committed and depended on Pacheco. He had 15 carries, 76 yards, and a touchdown, and he had 12 touches per game in the playoffs. So when the Chiefs needed him most, he stood up and responded, and I think that that gives him a leg up on the job in 2023. I think if everything hit right for Pacheco this year, he could be a top 10 producer in fantasy. He's also got the 8th easiest strength of schedule. However, the biggest concern is obviously the competition for touches. He still has to battle with Clyde Edwards-Helaire, who was a former first-round pick, and Jerick McKinnon ended up having a big year towards the end of the year for the Chiefs last year as well. So he could threaten touches for Pacheco, and that is why, even though we've seen some great things from him, there is a lot still potentially holding him back, and it's hard to invest too much in him, although if you're looking for upside, Pacheco has it in spades. Rounding out my top 30, up next I have A.J. Dillon. He's my last back in tier number 7. He has questionable standalone value, I would say, because we believe that Aaron Jones is going to get the majority of the looks. However, he is one of the most valuable handcuffs in fantasy, and if he were to take that #1 role, whether that be an injury or otherwise, Dillon has legit top 15 potential each and every week. It was a small sample size, but when we did see RB1 A.J. Dillon, he showed up in a big way against Chicago in week 13 with that role. 21 total touches, 119 yards, and a tutty. That is the potential that he has should he be able to take that #1 role, and a top 5 strength of schedule does not hurt. Into tier 8, and my favorite of the Washington running backs is next. It is Antonio Gibson, who is going to be the pass-catching back in Washington, and that is likely the more valuable piece for a team that is not going to be, and really hasn't been for a while, very good. I am taking Gibby over B-Rob because of that. There are plenty of reasons for concern with this offense, obviously. With Sam Howell at the controls, we don't know what it is going to look like, but there's probably going to be a lot of usage in the backfield, and I would take Gibby as my guy to be able to perform. 32, I have Khalil Herbert. He is my pick to lead the Bears running room this season. He's got that top 2 strength of schedule, which you have to love, and the competition is going to be fierce for him, which you don't love. Rashawn Johnson was brought in to potentially take over that role for him. My next man up at number 32 is my pick to take over the Bears backfield. A lot of options there, but I like Khalil Herbert the best for the Bears. Now, he has to deal with Rashawn Johnson. He also has Donta Foreman, who could take touches away from him. There's also the potential that this is a 3-headed monster, and everyone shares the load a little bit. But if anyone takes that #1 role, my pick is going to be Herbert, and I think that he could really hit for us if he can see the lion's share of the touches. To 33, I have David Montgomery here. He moved to Detroit, staying within the division. He was mediocre at best as far as efficiency is concerned. However, I do like him as an RB3 option because the volume alone is going to help him hit on his ADP, and he's a cheap piece in a great offense. The same reasons I love Jahmyr Gibbs are the reasons to love Montgomery. That schedule, that awesome offensive line. It's just, what does his touch count look like week in and week out? We're not exactly sure. That's why I have him here in the mid-30s. Jamal Williams is up next. Last year's running back won as far as touchdowns scored. He's got goal line work for sure in this New Orleans offense, plus that 3-game suspension for Alvin Kamara. That means that Williams is worth a roster spot and could hit for us more than we expect, depending on what happens in that backfield in 2023. Elijah Mitchell is my next man up, probably the most valuable cuff in fantasy, sitting behind Run CMC and that awesome 49ers offense. He's going to be a top 15 back on a week-to-week basis if CMC were to go down, and he could also have some weekly flex value depending on what his usage looks like. Last year when CMC was active, there were weeks where Mitchell still was a viable fantasy option because the 49ers just run the football that much. To tier number 9, I kick it off with Rashad Penny. I think Penny is an under-the-radar pick, obviously meaning if he can stay healthy, he is sliding into that top 5 offense, and if he carves out a role from himself in it, he will be able to hit on his ADP. The big thing you worry about for Penny is that injury history, so beware with that. But he could hit, and he is a cheap piece to another great offense. Gus Edwards fits that bill as well. He is next up at 37. He is trending up when we consider the contract situation with J.K. Dobbins, and Edwards has flashed solid ability with limited opportunities his entire career. He's averaged over 5 yards per carry in every season of his career as well. So if Gus Edwards were to get opportunities consistently in this offense, he would easily outperform his ADP, and he's got a good amount of upside in that Baltimore Ravens offense. Devon Achane, not sure if I'm saying that right, but the rookie for Miami is up next at 38. He has monster potential in this offense if he carves out a role. Miami is going to put up points with the best of them, and Achane is the pass-catching back that Miami desperately needed. He's been explosive in the passing game over the last couple years, and that speed that he has also matches exactly with what the Fins want to do. They invested a 3rd-round pick in him, and the only competition that he has are ex-49ers. Both Raheem Mostert and Jeff Wilson Jr. do not scare me. I think sooner rather than later this could be Achane's backfield, and if Miami and their quarterback really can stay healthy, they are going to put up a ton of points, which means Achane could crush this ADP if he can get 15 plus touches per game. Next, into my 10th tier, I start with Brian Robinson, the running back for Washington. Just don't like him as much because he is mainly a rusher and not a pass catcher out of the backfield, and I just don't see a ton of value in that role for Washington this year. At 40, I have Tyler Algier, and obviously the addition of B.J. Robinson in Atlanta completely kills his upside. However, if there were to be an injury, we saw Algier dominate for a majority of the season on a per-touch basis for Atlanta, and he would slide into a fairly big role and would have plenty of usage on a weekly basis if he ended up being the RB1. Samaje Perine should be a great backup in Denver, and he's got potential, especially early on if Javonte Williams is not ready. I have him at 41. At 42 is Zach Charbonnet. Big question mark right now because of that shoulder injury, but he could slide into a big role in an offense that is going to put up points in Seattle, depending on what happens with K9. At 43, it's Donta Foreman. He is the last back I have in tier 10. I think he has the second best opportunity to slide into that starting job in Chicago. We saw him crush for the Carolina Panthers last year when he was given an opportunity, and that was in a far worse offense really than I think Foreman is going to walk into in Chicago this year. So hope that with some touches he could produce. Now into my 11th and final tier. These are dart throws that have some upside if everything breaks right for them. I start with Jerick McKinnon. Obviously, you want pieces of that Kansas City offense, the best scoring offense in the league. Probably will be again this year. If I can get him at a decent price, which I most likely will be able to, I am going to be owning plenty of shares of McKinnon this year.
The Miami running backs are next. I have Mostert and Wilson here at 45 and 46. I just don't know how this backfield is going to shake up with them. I like Akane the most out of the three, but if one of these two guys were to take the job, it would be very valuable. Damian Harris, same thing for him. He's up next at 47. If anything were to happen to Cook, or he just starts to eat into the workload a little bit in a Buffalo offense, I love the upside that Damian Harris possesses. At 48, it is former Buffalo Bill, now in Houston, Devin Singletary. Should see a lot of work if anything were to once again happen to Dameon Pierce. Rashawn Johnson is next for Chicago, the third running back for the Bears that I have in my top 50. They just might run it that much in 2023, and I also think that as a rookie, it might take him a little bit longer, but if he flashes early, they may feed him, and that would give him a path to a top 25 season. The last running back on my list is a guy who I think is going to have the goal line role at least the majority of the year for the Jacksonville Jaguars. That is Tank Bigsby. They drafted him for a reason. It was the inefficiency of Travis Etienne in the red zone. Bigsby should be able to fix that. And the Jaguars are probably going to score a ton of points this year. They play in a joke of a division, and so I think plenty of upside for Bigsby this late in drafts. And that is going to do it for my running back rankings. Thank you guys for putting up with me in the video. Hope you enjoyed the content, and I hope you learned something. If you didn't learn something through all of this content, then what the heck am I doing out here? If you guys have any questions or comments, please drop those down below. I love the engagement. It's one of the main reasons I do these videos. Crush the like button if you haven't already, and subscribe to the channel as well so we can keep pushing for our first 1,000 subscribers. Keep an eye out for wide receiver and tight end rankings coming out soon. I also just finished my quarterback rankings as well, so check those out if you haven't already. Also keep an eye out, I have a ton of shorts coming out. I have over the last couple of weeks and more to come, so hit that notification button so you do not miss anything. This is Relentless Press. I'm your host, Abraham Opatz, and I will see you next time.